The ceremonial hall aboard Station Nexus Prime stretched 3 kilometers in every direction, its crystalline dome offering a breathtaking view of the Andromeda spiral. Representatives from 47 species filled the massive space, their varied forms creating a tapestry of colors, textures, and geometric patterns that would have overwhelmed most beings. Commander Sarah Chen stood at attention on the central dais, her human form appearing almost insignificant among the towering Krailthai warriors and the ethereal Vashti diplomats floating nearby. The Galactic Defense Coalition's annual honor ceremony was the most prestigious military event in known space. For the first time in the organization's 300-year history, a human had been selected to preside over the proceedings. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze upon her, from the compound eyes of the insectoid Jex to the thermal sensors of the silicon-based thermals. Each species represented here had contributed to galactic peace for centuries, before humanity had even discovered faster-than-light travel. Admiral Kethvar, the towering Krailthai Supreme Commander, gestured toward Sarah with one of his 4 arms. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the ceremonial lights as he spoke in the deep, resonant tones that had commanded respect across a dozen star systems. Today, we honor those who have shown exceptional courage in the defense of our coalition. Commander Chen will present the Stellar Cross to our recipients. Sarah stepped forward, her crisp black uniform bearing the silver insignia that marked her as one of the youngest humans ever to achieve command rank. The ceremonial sword at her side was not merely decorative. It was forged from metal taken from the hull of the first human ship to make peaceful contact with alien life. Every human officer carried such a blade, a reminder of how far their species had come in just 75 years of galactic citizenship. The first recipient approached the podium, a Vashti colonel whose translucent form shimmered with contained energy. The ceremony proceeded with ancient precision, each movement choreographed by centuries of tradition. Sarah's voice carried clearly across the vast hall as she recited the commendations, her words translated simultaneously into dozens of languages and communication methods. As she pinned the stellar cross to the colonel's energy field using a specially designed quantum clasp, Sarah caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb stood among the human delegation, his expression dark with barely contained resentment. Webb had been passed over for promotion twice in the past year, each time losing out to what he called alien favoritism in the command structure. The ceremony continued with military precision. Sarah presented awards to a thermals captain who had saved an entire mining colony, a Jex squadron leader who had single-handedly held off pirates for 6 hours, and a young Krailth lieutenant who had risked his life to rescue survivors from a collapsing space station. Each story represented the best of their species, the finest examples of courage and sacrifice that the galaxy had to offer. But as Sarah reached for the final award, she noticed Webb stepping forward from his position in the crowd. His movement was deliberate, calculated, and completely against protocol. The nearest Krailthai guards tensed, their massive forms shifting slightly as they recognized the potential breach of ceremony. Sarah's enhanced peripheral vision, a modification that most humans in military service received, caught the subtle signs of alarm spreading through the alien delegates. Webb's face was flushed red, a distinctly human display of emotion that stood out sharply against the controlled demeanor of the alien officers. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and Sarah could see the pulse beating rapidly in his neck. Whatever was driving him forward was beyond mere disagreement with command decisions. The hall fell silent as Webb approached the dais. Even the ambient hum of the station's life support systems seemed to pause as thousands of beings focused their attention on the unprecedented disruption. Sarah maintained her position at the podium, her expression calm and controlled, but her mind was already analyzing possible responses and their consequences. Admiral Kethvar's 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of confusion and mild alarm. The Krailth had strict hierarchies built into their very genetics. The idea of a subordinate publicly challenging a superior during a sacred ceremony was almost incomprehensible to them. His translator unit crackled with static as he struggled to find words that could bridge the gap between species understanding. Webb came to a stop just meters from the dais, his breathing heavy and his posture aggressive. Sarah could see that he had consumed alcohol, another distinctly human trait that many alien species found disturbing during formal occasions. His normally pristine uniform was slightly disheveled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that suggested this confrontation had been building for some time. The Vashti delegates began to emit low harmonic tones, their species equivalent of nervous murmuring. Several Zhex officers clicked their mandibles in what Sarah recognized as disapproval. The careful diplomatic balance that humanity had worked decades to achieve was suddenly balanced on a knife's edge, with the actions of one man threatening to undo years of progress. Sarah straightened her shoulders and took a step forward, placing herself directly between Webb and the assembled delegates. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority that had earned her this position despite her youth and her species' relative newcomer status in galactic affairs. "Lieutenant Commander Webb," she said, her words cutting through the silence like the blade at her side. "You are out of position." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that every military mind in the hall understood immediately. It was both a direct observation and a final warning, an invitation to return to proper protocol before consequences became inevitable. Sarah's tone was level and professional, but there was something in her bearing that suggested she was fully prepared for whatever came next. Webb's response would determine not just his own fate, but potentially humanity's standing in the galactic community. As Sarah waited for his answer, she felt the weight of her species' future pressing down upon her shoulders like the gravity of a collapsing star. Webb's face twisted into a sneer that would have been recognizable to any human as pure contempt, but the alien delegates interpreted it through their own species' understanding of facial expressions. The Krailthai saw threat display, the Vashti detected energy disruption, and the Zhex recognized the prelude to violence. Sarah realized that Webb's emotional state was being magnified through the lens of interspecies misunderstanding. "Out of position?" Webb's voice carried across the ceremonial hall, amplified by the acoustic design intended to ensure every word of the ceremony reached every delegate. "I'll tell you what's out of position, Commander. Having a human woman command aliens who have been fighting wars since before Earth had written language. That's what's out of position." The words hung in the air like poison gas, spreading their toxic effect through the assembled crowd. Sarah felt the temperature in the hall seem to drop several degrees as thousands of beings processed what they had just heard. The careful diplomatic relationships that humanity had spent decades building were cracking like ice under pressure. Admiral Kethvar's translator unit sparked and went silent, a sign that the Krailthai was experiencing emotions too intense for the machine to process. His forearms spread wide in what Sarah recognized as a gesture of complete bewilderment. Among the Krailthai, gender roles were fluid, and command was based purely on combat effectiveness. The concept of questioning authority based on reproductive biology was alien to them in the most literal sense. The Vashti delegates began to pulse with deep red energy, their translucent forms flickering like dying stars. Their species communicated through harmonic resonance, and Webb's words were creating dissonance in their collective consciousness. Several of them began to drift backward, seeking distance from what they perceived as a source of contamination. Sarah remained perfectly still, her military training overriding every human instinct to respond with matching aggression. She had spent years studying not just tactics and strategy, but the delicate art of interspecies diplomacy. Every gesture, every word, every facial expression would be analyzed and interpreted by beings whose evolutionary backgrounds had prepared them for entirely different forms of communication. "Lieutenant Commander Webb," she said, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from absolute confidence in one's position. "You are relieved of duty pending investigation. Security will escort you to detention." But Webb was beyond reason now, his face flushed with alcohol and years of accumulated resentment. "Security," he laughed, a harsh sound that echoed strangely in the crystalline chamber. "You mean those Krailthai thugs who couldn't find their own thorax with both hands? Or maybe the Zhex drones who follow orders like insects because that's what they are?" The reaction was immediate and explosive. A Krailthai captain's war cry shook the deck plating, a sound that triggered combat responses in half the species present. Zhex mandibles clicked in rapid-fire patterns that Sarah's enhanced hearing recognized as their equivalent of shouted curses. Even the normally peaceful Vashti began to emit the high-frequency tones that preceded their combat forms. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself directly between Webb and the increasingly agitated crowd. Her hand moved to rest on the ceremonial sword at her side, not as a threat, but as a reminder of the authority she represented. The blade was more than decoration. It was a symbol of humanity's hard-won place in the galactic community. "Stand down, all personnel," Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos with the kind of authority that transcended species barriers. The words were automatically translated into dozens of languages, but her tone carried meanings that required no translation. "This is a ceremonial function, and order will be maintained." The alien delegates hesitated, caught between their instinctive reactions and their respect for proper protocol. Sarah seized the moment, turning to address Webb with the kind of cold professionalism that every career military officer would recognize regardless of their planet of origin. "You have made accusations against your commanding officer, against our allies, and against the very foundation of the coalition we serve," she said, her words measured and precise. "You have violated your oath, dishonored your uniform, and embarrassed our species. But most importantly, you have demonstrated exactly why humanity deserves its place in galactic leadership." Webb's confused expression showed he didn't understand her meaning, but several of the alien officers were already beginning to nod in recognition. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as she built toward her point. "Every species in this hall has members who let their prejudices override their judgment. Every species has individuals who confuse their personal failures with systemic oppression. What makes humanity unique is not that we lack such individuals, it's how we respond to them." Sarah gestured toward the assembled delegates, her movement encompassing representatives from dozens of worlds and evolutionary paths. "You see weakness in diversity, Webb. You see threats in cooperation. You see failure in the very partnerships that have brought peace to this galaxy for the first time in recorded history. That narrow thinking is exactly what humanity brings unique perspective to overcome." The hall was silent now, every being present focused on Sarah's words. She could feel the weight of species prejudices and misconceptions pressing against her, but also the growing recognition that something important was happening here. This was more than just military discipline. It was a demonstration of the principles that had earned humanity its place among the stars. Webb's face was growing redder, his hands clenching and unclenching as he struggled with emotions that were clearly beyond his ability to control. "You think you're better than me because you play politics with these aliens? You think sucking up to non-humans makes you a good officer?" Sarah smiled then, the expression cold and sharp as the space between stars. "No, Webb. I think I'm better than you because I earned my rank through competence, courage, and dedication to something larger than my own ego. The same way every officer in this hall earned their position, regardless of how many legs they have or what color their blood runs." The comparison was deliberate and devastating. Sarah had just aligned herself with the alien officers while simultaneously highlighting Webb's isolation from the very principles that defined military service. Every career officer present, human or otherwise, understood exactly what she was doing and why it was necessary. Webb took a step forward, his hand moving toward the ceremonial dagger at his own belt. The gesture was clearly threatening, and Sarah saw security personnel beginning to move in response. But she also saw something else, an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why humans had earned their place as equals among species that had been spacefaring for millennia. Time seemed to slow as Sarah made her decision, knowing that the next few moments would determine not just her own fate, but humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy. Webb's hand closed around the grip of his ceremonial dagger, the metal warm from the station's environmental systems. His movements were clumsy, telegraphed by the alcohol in his system and the rage clouding his judgment. To the trained eyes watching from around the hall, his attack was as predictable as a meteor's trajectory and about as avoidable. Sarah didn't reach for her own blade. Instead, she took a single step to the side, her body moving with the fluid precision that came from years of combat training in variable gravity environments. Webb's clumsy lunge carried him past her, his momentum unchecked and his balance compromised. What happened next was a demonstration of the kind of adaptive thinking that had made humans valuable allies to species across the galaxy. Rather than draw steel, Sarah simply extended her foot. Webb's stumbling charge met the obstacle and sent him sprawling across the ceremonial dais, his dagger clattering away across the polished deck plating. The sound echoed through the vast hall like a bell tolling the end of his career. The alien delegates watched in fascination as Sarah demonstrated a peculiarly human approach to conflict resolution: minimal force, maximum effectiveness, with just enough humiliation to make the point stick. The Krailthai would have met the attack with overwhelming violence. The Vashti would have used energy manipulation to simply disintegrate the threat. The Zheks would have swarmed the attacker with collective action. But Sarah had used Webb's own momentum against him, turning his aggression into a display of incompetence that spoke louder than any words. As Webb struggled to regain his footing, his face flushed with embarrassment as much as anger, Sarah addressed the assembled delegates. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast space. "What you have just witnessed is a perfect example of why humanity brings unique value to our coalition. We don't always choose the most obvious solution to a problem." Admiral Kethvar's translator unit crackled back to life, processing his mixture of amusement and approval. Among the Krailthai, combat prowess was the ultimate measure of leadership capability. Sarah had just demonstrated that she could handle a threat without breaking protocol, damaging diplomatic relationships, or even drawing her weapon. Webb finally managed to stand, his uniform disheveled and his dignity in ruins, but instead of accepting defeat, he seemed to grow even more enraged. "You think this is over?" he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you can humiliate me in front of these things and just walk away?" The choice of words was deliberate and devastating. Webb had just referred to the assembled alien leadership, beings who commanded fleets, governed star systems, and represented civilizations older than human recorded history, as things. The insult transcended species barriers and struck at the very foundation of diplomatic respect. Sarah felt the mood in the hall shift like the pressure change before a storm. The Krailthai delegation began to emit the low, growling sounds that preceded their battle fury. Vashti forms flickered between their peaceful and combat configurations. Even the normally docile thermal representatives began to glow with the heat signatures that indicated extreme agitation. But Sarah also saw something else in the crowd: expectation. The alien delegates weren't just angry, they were curious. How would humanity's representative handle an escalation that threatened to destroy years of careful relationship building? This was a test, and everyone present understood the stakes. "You're absolutely right, Webb," Sarah said, her voice calm and measured despite the tension crackling through the air. "This isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning to demonstrate exactly why humans have earned our place in this coalition." She turned to address the entire assembly, her posture straight and confident. "Every species represented here has faced the challenge of individuals who cannot rise above their own limitations. The Krailth have their berserkers who cannot distinguish between enemy and ally. The Vashti have their purists who refuse to interact with solid matter. The Zheks have their drones who cannot function without the hive mind." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd as Sarah named truths that every species understood about themselves. She continued, building toward her point with a kind of rhetorical skill that had made humans effective diplomats despite their relative youth in galactic affairs. "What makes us valuable partners is not that we lack such individuals. It's that we have learned to work with them, around them, and when necessary, through them. We adapt. We improvise. We find solutions that preserve dignity while maintaining order." Webb was breathing heavily now, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "You're defending them against your own species," he screamed, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're a traitor to humanity." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before warriors. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze in the hall, alien and human alike. This was the moment when words would no longer suffice, when action would speak louder than any speech about cooperation and understanding. Sarah walked slowly toward Webb, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through position. "I am not defending them against humanity, Webb. I am defending the best of humanity against its worst. I am defending the humans who earned their place among the stars through courage, skill, and dedication against those who would drag us back down into the gravity well of prejudice and fear." She stopped just outside his reach, close enough for every being in the hall to hear her words without amplification. "You want to know what makes me a good officer? It's not politics or diplomacy or playing favorites with alien allies. It's understanding that strength comes from unity, that wisdom comes from diversity, and that the only way to reach the stars is to leave behind the small-minded thinking that keeps civilizations trapped on single worlds." Webb's hand moved toward his remaining weapons, his intentions clear to every military mind present. But Sarah was ready for him, and what she did next would demonstrate the kind of decisive leadership that had convinced 47 alien species to accept humanity as equals among the stars. The hall held its breath as two humans faced each other across a divide that represented not just personal conflict, but competing visions of humanity's future in the galaxy. The next few seconds would determine which vision would prevail. Backslash. Webb's second attack came faster than his first, driven by desperation and the kind of cornered fury that made even trained soldiers unpredictable. His backup sidearm cleared its holster with surprising speed, the energy weapon's charging whine cutting through the ceremonial silence like a scream. But speed without precision was just another form of failure, and Webb's alcohol-impaired coordination made his intentions obvious long before his finger found the trigger. Sarah moved with the kind of enhanced reflexes that came from genetic modifications and years of training in hostile environments. Her body shifted sideways as the energy beam seared the air where she had been standing, the discharge leaving ionized particles dancing in the ceremonial lighting. The smell of ozone and burnt atmosphere filled the immediate area around the dais. What happened next was a masterclass in the kind of adaptive combat techniques that had made human soldiers legendary throughout the galaxy. Instead of drawing her own weapon or calling for security, Sarah did something that no other species would have considered. She used the ceremonial environment itself as a weapon. The crystalline dome above the hall was designed to focus and amplify sound for ceremonial purposes, but Sarah understood that the same principles applied to directed energy weapons. As Webb fired again, his aim wild and his stance compromised, Sarah positioned herself precisely where the crystal formations would redirect his own weapon's energy back toward him. The reflected beam struck Webb's weapon hand, not with enough force to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to make him drop the smoking sidearm. The weapon clattered across the deck plating, its energy cell depleted, and its targeting systems fried by the feedback loop. Webb stared at his tingling fingers in disbelief, unable to comprehend how his target had turned his own attack against him. The alien delegates erupted in a cacophony of sounds that would have been overwhelming to most humans, but Sarah's enhanced hearing filtered the noise into distinct channels of communication. The Kraelth were roaring approval in their ancient battle language. The Vashti were harmonizing in frequencies that indicated deep respect for combat ingenuity. Even the Zheks were clicking their mandibles in the rapid patterns that meant professional admiration. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward, his massive form moving with surprising grace across the ceremonial space. When he spoke, his words were automatically translated into every language present, but his tone needed no interpretation. "Commander Chen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of formal recognition that the Kraelth reserved for warriors who had proven themselves in battle. "That was the most impressive display of tactical thinking I have witnessed in 30 years of military service. You turned a weapon against itself using nothing but understanding of physics and environmental awareness." Sarah inclined her head respectfully, but kept her attention focused on Webb, who was still standing but clearly defeated. His shoulders had slumped, his face had lost its flush of rage, and his eyes showed the kind of hollow desperation that came from realizing that every choice he had made had only dug him deeper into disgrace. "The impressive part isn't the technique," Sarah replied, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "It's what it represents. Humans don't just adapt to new environments. We learn to use those environments to solve problems that seem impossible. We don't just overcome obstacles, we turn obstacles into advantages." She gestured toward the assembled delegates, her movement encompassing the incredible diversity of forms and intelligences present in the hall. "Every species here has unique gifts. The Kraelth have unmatched courage and fighting spirit. The Vashti can manipulate energy in ways that seem like magic. The Zheks can coordinate actions across multiple individuals with perfect precision." Sarah's voice gained strength as she built toward her conclusion. "But humans bring something different to this coalition. We bring the ability to see connections where others see only separation. We find solutions that use the strengths of others to overcome weaknesses that seemed insurmountable. We build bridges not just between worlds, but between ways of thinking." Webb raised his head to look at her, and for the first time since the confrontation began, his expression showed something other than anger. There was confusion there, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. "You're saying that sucking up to aliens makes humans special?" he asked, his voice lacking the venom it had carried before. Sarah shook her head, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "No, Webb. I'm saying that learning from our allies makes humans stronger. Working with beings who think differently than we do makes us better at solving problems we never could have imagined when we were stuck on one world, looking up at stars we thought we'd never reach." The hall had grown quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This wasn't the tension of impending conflict, but the focused attention of minds processing new information. Sarah could see understanding dawning in faces both human and alien as they recognized the truth in her words. "You see threats where I see opportunities," she continued, addressing Webb but speaking to the entire assembly. "You see competition where I see collaboration. You see weakness in diversity where I see the kind of strength that can only come from combining different approaches to the same challenges." Webb looked around the hall, perhaps seeing the alien delegates clearly for the first time since the ceremony began. The Krailthai weren't thugs. They were professional soldiers with centuries of experience in combat and command. The Vashti weren't arrogant energy beings. They were explorers and scientists who had mapped star systems before humans discovered fire. The Zheks weren't mindless drones. They were individuals who chose cooperation because they understood its value. Webb began, then stopped, his voice failing as the magnitude of his actions became clear to him. He had not just embarrassed himself or violated military protocol. He had threatened to destroy relationships that represented humanity's best hope for a meaningful future among the stars. Sarah stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a level that only he could hear clearly. "It's not too late, Webb. You made mistakes, but mistakes can be overcome. The question is whether you want to be part of humanity's future in space or part of its past on Earth." The choice she offered was more than personal. It was symbolic of the choice facing all of humanity as they established themselves among the galactic community. Webb's answer would determine not just his own fate, but demonstrate to every watching alien whether humans could truly overcome their worst impulses in service of their highest aspirations. The ceremonial hall waited in perfect silence as Webb struggled with a decision that would define the rest of his life and potentially influence his species' reputation for generations to come. Webb's internal struggle played out across his features like a storm system visible from orbit. Sarah could see the precise moment when his anger finally burned itself out, leaving behind the kind of exhausted clarity that came after a fever broke. His shoulders sagged as he looked around the ceremonial hall, truly seeing the assembled delegates for the first time since his confrontation began. "Commander," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the perfect acoustics of the crystalline dome. He stopped, swallowed hard, and tried again. "I have disgraced my uniform, my species, and myself. I request permission to resign my commission." The words carried a weight that transcended mere military protocol. Every being in the hall understood that they were witnessing something significant, not just the end of one officer's career, but a demonstration of the principles that would define humanity's role in the galactic community for generations to come. Sarah studied Webb's face for a long moment, reading the genuine remorse and newfound understanding in his expression. Then she did something that surprised everyone present, including herself. She shook her head. "Request denied, Lieutenant Commander," she said firmly. "Your commission is not yours alone to resign. It belongs to every human who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. It belongs to every child who will grow up in a galaxy where humans and aliens work together to solve problems none of us could handle alone." Webb's confusion was evident, but Sarah continued before he could speak. "You made mistakes tonight, serious ones that will have consequences. But those mistakes also provide an opportunity for you to demonstrate the same adaptability and growth that makes humans valuable allies to beings across 47 star systems." Admiral Kethvar stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the dais. When he spoke, his words were measured and formal. "Commander Chen, the Krailthai delegation wishes to understand how you propose to handle this situation. Among our people, such insubordination would result in immediate expulsion from military service." Sarah nodded respectfully to the Admiral, acknowledging the weight of his question. "With respect, Admiral, that difference in approach is exactly why human participation strengthens our coalition. The Krailthai response to failure is swift and final, which works well for maintaining discipline and hierarchy. But humans have learned that sometimes the greatest victories come from giving people the chance to redeem themselves. She turned to address the entire assembly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from absolute conviction in her principles. I propose that Lieutenant Commander Webb be assigned to a special diplomatic mission, one that will require him to work directly with representatives from every species present in this hall. He will spend the next standard year learning about the cultures, traditions, and perspectives of our allies. The proposal sent ripples of discussion through the crowd as delegates conferred in their various forms of communication. Sarah could hear the Krailthai rumbling among themselves, the Vashti harmonizing in questioning tones, and the Zheks clicking in rapid consultation patterns. Webb himself looked stunned by the suggestion. "Commander, I don't understand. Why would you trust me with such an assignment after what I've done?" Sarah's smile was gentle but carried steel beneath its surface. "Because, Webb, I've seen what happens when humans are given the chance to prove themselves worthy of the trust others place in them. You've spent tonight demonstrating your worst qualities, your prejudice, your anger, your inability to see beyond your own limitations. Now I want to give you the chance to discover your best qualities." She gestured toward the alien delegates, many of whom were beginning to nod in understanding of her approach. "Every being in this hall was once where you are now, struggling to understand perspectives that seemed alien and threatening. The difference is that they learned to grow beyond those limitations. I believe you can too." Admiral Kethvar's translator unit processed his thoughts for several seconds before he spoke again. "This is an unusual approach to discipline. Among the Krailthai, redemption is earned through combat, not through education." "And that's exactly why this coalition works," Sarah replied. "The Krailthai approach creates warriors of unmatched skill and courage. The human approach creates individuals capable of bridging differences that once seemed impossible to overcome. Combined, these approaches give us tools to handle challenges that no single species could face alone." A new voice joined the conversation as High Diplomat Velter of the Vashti delegation drifted closer to the dais. Her translucent form pulsed with colors that Sarah's enhanced visual cortex translated as curiosity and approval. "Commander Chen raises an intriguing point. Perhaps this incident provides an opportunity to test the human theory of redemption through understanding." Webb looked between Sarah and the alien delegates, his expression showing the beginning of something that might have been hope. "You're serious about this assignment? You actually want me to work with our allies?" "I want you to discover what I already know," Sarah said. "That our allies are not threats to be contained or competitors to be defeated. They are partners who can help us become more than we ever could have been alone. The question is whether you're willing to take that journey." The ceremonial hall fell silent as Webb wrestled with the offer. Sarah could see him processing everything that had happened, from his drunken accusations to his failed attacks to the patient explanations that had followed. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "I accept the assignment, Commander, and I apologize to everyone present for my behavior. I was wrong about many things tonight." The response from the alien delegates was immediate and positive. The Krailth began a low harmonic humming that indicated approval of honorable behavior. The Vashti pulsed with warm colors that suggested acceptance of his apology. Even the Zheks clicked their mandibles in patterns that Sarah recognized as welcoming sounds. Admiral Kethvar approached Webb directly, extending one of his 4 hands in the Krailthai gesture of professional respect. "Lieutenant Commander, if you are sincere in your desire to learn, the Krailthai delegation would be honored to help with your education. We believe that understanding comes through shared hardship as much as shared knowledge." One by one, representatives from every major species delegation stepped forward to offer their assistance with Webb's year-long assignment. The Vashti offered to teach him about energy manipulation and the mathematics that governed interstellar travel. The Zheks promised to show him the principles of collective decision-making and resource optimization. Smaller delegations added their own expertise to the growing list of educational opportunities. Sarah watched with satisfaction as Webb shook hands, touched energy fields, and accepted mandible clicks from beings he had dismissed as things just minutes earlier. This was humanity at its best, not perfect, but capable of learning and growing beyond their mistakes. As the ceremony finally drew to a close, Sarah realized that the evening's events had accomplished something more valuable than any planned demonstration of military precision. They had shown the entire galactic community that humans brought not just technological innovation, or tactical thinking to the coalition, but the kind of moral flexibility that turned enemies into allies and failures into opportunities for growth. The stars visible through the crystalline dome seemed brighter somehow as delegates began to file out of the ceremonial hall. Sarah remained at her post, watching as Webb walked alongside alien officers who were already beginning his education in perspectives that would reshape his understanding of the galaxy and humanity's place within it. Admiral Kethvar was the last to leave, pausing beside Sarah as the massive hall emptied around them. "Commander Chen, tonight you demonstrated why the Coalition Council was wise to approve human participation in senior command positions. Your species brings something unique to our alliance, the ability to transform conflict into cooperation through patient understanding." Sarah nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the stars beyond the dome. "Thank you, Admiral. But I think what we really bring is something simpler than that. We bring hope, the belief that no matter how different we are, we can find ways to work together towards something greater than any of us could achieve alone." As the ceremonial hall fell into the quiet of deep space, Sarah understood that humanity had passed another test in their journey toward true equality among the stars. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the uniquely human conviction that even the worst failures could become the foundation for the greatest successes. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would test the Coalition for centuries to come. But tonight had proven that humans would meet those challenges not by standing apart from their alien allies, but by standing beside them as equals in the greatest adventure any species had ever undertaken, the exploration and protection of the infinite frontier that stretched between the stars.